insert yourselves into these conversations inside the network and listen to what other people are saying. Think about what they're saying and try and imagine what that looks like for your role or for your interests and start to build from there.
Welcome to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers Podcast. Each episode will bring you conversations from business leaders and up-and-coming stars in the commercial real estate industry in Canada. Our guests will share their unique career journeys, passions, and advice on what it takes to be successful in this industry. This podcast is brought to you by Highview Partners, connecting people who perform in Canadian real estate.
I am your host, James Ashley, and today I will be connecting you with Geoff Williams. Geoff has been working in the facility management and real estate industry for over 20 years. He is currently the Director of Operations for Eastern Canada at Angus Consulting Management Limited, otherwise known as ACML. He graduated from the University of Waterloo in architecture, and his hunger for design and finding solutions to complex challenges led him to a career in real estate. He has a breadth of knowledge and experience that touches upon a number of pathways, including FM consulting, non-for-profit, and the service provider. He is a proud member of the International Facility Management Association, otherwise known as IFMA, where he's been heavily involved at a local, national, and international level for almost 2 decades. Outside of working hours, Geoff has dedicated much time to educating himself and others. Through IFMA, he has attained his FMP and SFP designations and is a qualified instructor who has volunteered his time to teaching hundreds of FM students. Geoff has won a number of awards for his outstanding contribution to facilities management, and he continuously looks for new opportunities to help the industry grow. Geoff, very good morning. Welcome to the People Who Perform podcast. Great to have you here with us today.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you very much, James. Sunny, snowy Sunday morning. Nice to be indoors.
Exactly. And a disclaimer for our listeners and our audience, Geoff and I are recording this from the comfort of our own homes today. There may be some dogs barking in the background. We will persevere to have this conversation, which I'm really looking forward to, because this is the first conversation where we are really diving into the FM space, facilities management. So let's start our conversation by rewinding the clock to the year 2000. Why did you choose the facilities management career path, Geoff?
It's really interesting. I've had this conversation a lot with peers in the industry. Very frequent that we have a conversation where, FM often chose us rather than the other way around. And, there are a few education programs out there that somebody might, study for in college or university. But I was studying architecture at University of Waterloo. It was a co-op program. Tried a bunch of different avenues. I spent some time working in kind of public businesses. I worked for National Defense in a co-op placement. I worked for Hospitals for Sick Children in a co-op placement. I worked for an architecture firm in a co-op placement, and one of the latter ones that I had in my co-op career was working for a company that was a sister company of an architecture firm, but was doing facility management consulting. And we were primarily working in the healthcare space, and I did that for, I think, 2 work terms, but near the end of school, I was doing it full time while going to school. And I think that it latched on to a passion that I had, and it was something that I was deeply interested in. There were elements that were connected to the studies that I had. There were elements that were different. I kind of watched my peers and what they were doing in architecture-related practices. And not that it wasn't for me, it didn't juice me up quite the same way that the consulting business did. And I really, really enjoyed it. And so that was kind of how I fell in. Could I have said 20 years from now that would be what I would be doing at the time? I don't think so. I think that was the really interesting thing. It was a new thing for me, and it was a great thing at the time, and it just grew from there.
Excellent. Now, taking a closer look at your first job in the industry, what were those valuable lessons in the early days, and how have they impacted your career growth?
Yeah, so my first job was actually with the firm that I've been working for through school. I was managing a portion of the consultancy business, really an FM focused business unit. We had other business units that were focused around building commissioning and other things that were related to owners and operators of properties. But I learned a lot about buildings. I think that was there was a big piece of that. But the key takeaway that I took away, I think, was from one of my clients. He was really heavily focused on this idea that, you can't manage what you don't know. Making information-based decisions and data-based decisions so that you had something to backstop intuition. And what I found in the consulting world that I'd been doing is that up until that point, I'd say a lot of my clients were making decisions based on their gut. They didn't have the information to make a decision. They had experience, which was, very, very important. They weren't making decisions based on anything other than intuition and experience. And I really found that was a good touchstone to kind of continue my career, and it became part of the toolkit that I've used and continued to use as I progressed in my career.
Let's discover more about the International Facility Management Association, otherwise known as IFMA. And you've played an integral role both on a local, national, and international platform for many years. For the best part of the last 2 decades, held numerous positions, including president for a number of years. How does the association, how does IFMA help you and fellow members stay connected to the industry?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'd say how it helped me and how it helps members is probably different depending on where you are at your career. So in the early days, it was really making connections and starting conversations, right? Getting in front of people that maybe I wouldn't have ever really had an opportunity to do. And facility management is such that a lot of my peers would be kind of embedded in a building, embedded in a business that they were supporting, and not having that opportunity to talk about the kind of their roles and their responsibilities and their ideas and those thought processes. And, this is certainly before social media, before internet was really ubiquitous. And so making connections became a really important thing. And locally, I did that through the Toronto chapter. And, they would have events, typically monthly, start to build friendships, start to build support mechanisms, start to get a little bit of mentorship. I know that there's one person that I met in the early days of IFMA that really gave me some clear mentorship. I'm not sure that he knew that he was doing it, but he definitely did. And, before I actually was heavily involved volunteering for the chapter, I was actually volunteering for the global community of practice focused around information technology. That kind of allowed me to have an outlet that was something that I didn't need to be kind of a captain of industry. It was really focused around technology and things that make other things tick. And I have a passion for that. And it allowed me to interact with people that were captains of industry in that regard. And it was an interesting way to kind of push and stretch your thinking and your knowledge, and to kind of get to a place of discomfort and then level out again. And I really liked that about it. So the connections and conversations was the first piece. The second piece really was education. I can remember the first IFMA conference that I went to. It was in Los Angeles in 1999. And, I don't think I'd ever seen that many people in one place at one time. And the opportunity to participate in something that was that big with so many people that were passionate about the industry and the organizations that they supported was just absolutely fantastic. And, we're now heavily virtual since about March last year. I think it's still going well. That education and the conferences are still happening. Participated in 3 or 4 last year as a speaker, and I think that still worked quite well. But I do think the face-to-face is important. We're building relationships with people and trying to make connections with people, and so education has changed a little bit, but I'm looking forward to going back the other way. The last element that I'd say that was quite important and has been quite important for IFMA, and we'll probably talk about it a little bit later on, but it is kind of one of those things that you get out of it, what you put into it. I spent a lot of time volunteering over the years. I probably spent, my wife might say too much time volunteering over the years, but I think that the opportunity to dig deeper and to learn, I wouldn't have gotten if I hadn't been volunteering nationally, internationally, and it's been quite an experience. I've got lifelong friends out of that, and often you'll hear people refer to their IFMA family. And I think that's quite an interesting thing that comes out of a professional association, is that you develop family-like connections.
Yeah, thanks for sharing how IFMA has helped you and how you see that helping fellow members. Now, you've had a unique experience in the sense of being involved at a local, national, and international platform and level, which brings a variety of experiences and I would imagine a variety of different cultures across the association. Can you talk about some of the differences of those experiences working on those different platforms and how that has impacted you and your career?
Yeah, so I think the way for people generally to get involved in the global side of IFMA is through the councils, which are vertical market based, or communities, which are kind of horizontal market based but global still. And so that was my first inroad. I've had a number of others since then. But the interesting thing that I've found is that, facility management is a relatively new industry, and different areas of the world are developing at different rates. And so what I found in the early days is that I would say it often felt like the United States was probably about 5 years ahead of Canada in the way that they were thinking about things. What I find now is I've been spending a fair amount of time in the Middle East, and they're significantly behind in some areas and significantly advanced in others. And so areas around sustainability are relatively new for them. But when they're thinking about technology and innovation, they've got a tremendous interest in that, and they want to push that envelope forward. And then I've attended a number of conferences outside of North America, and I think that that's where I've really kind of enjoyed hearing different perspectives and learning a lot from a variety of people. And when I've attended the conferences in Europe, it's really the perspective that I enjoy hearing. It's I don't know if refreshing is the right word, but it allows you to think a little bit differently about something that you thought you understood fully. And I think that's something that's really valuable, is to take something that you think you've got fully down pat and turn it into something else by looking at it through someone else's eyes. So that's the thing that I enjoy.
It's safe to say, Geoff, you've touched upon many aspects of facility management, from consulting, working in not-for-profit, to service providers across healthcare, data centers and critical sites, and commercial. Can you share your insights on the different touch points and the pathways that are available to FM professionals today?
There is so much opportunity in our industry. And I think that that's the kind of the really interesting thing about it. There's, you look at the business drivers of we'll call it the demand organization. So if, you're insourced, it's the company that you work for. Or if you're a service provider, the company that you're providing service to. And so there's all of these different vertical markets that people are in. And then you've got building types and complexity and sophistication. So those are things that kind of start to contextualize what you might be doing while you're there. When you start to think about it, every building is a little bit different, and every business is a little bit different. And so when you start to combine those two things, you've got a myriad of options for the facility manager coming into the industry. The pathways and touch points, I think, if you're considering a role, start to look at the things that interest you. Look at the things that interest you in the role and look at the strengths that you have. I think it's unwise to say that a facility manager role in one organization is going to be the same as a facility manager in another organization. And that's because there are so many different roles and responsibilities of the FM. The way IFMA looks at it, from an IFMA perspective, there's 11 core competencies, and they get combined in different ways. And you see that in job descriptions. So really take a step back, look at the job description, try and envision yourself and your passions inside that job description. Think about your strengths. You can always build on your strengths, and think about your weaknesses, and think about whether it's something that you want to get beyond that weakness. If it's not something you enjoy doing, not worth trying to get beyond it. Or if you think that you could find interest, you've just never had the opportunity, think about how that could strengthen and round you out differently as you grow in your career.
It's really important that first hurdle, that first step, when you are looking for that move into an industry, just to take a step back and do your homework, do your research, speak to people, connect with people in the industry, understand about the different competencies, those different touch points and pathways. And we've just touched upon a few in our conversation, and there are many more. It's really important that you enjoy what you do and you enjoy who you work with, which brings me into the next question, that now we're in the year 2021 and you're Director of Operations for Eastern Canada for ACML. What is it that you enjoy most about your role and the company as a whole?
Yeah, so I've had lots of different roles, some similar company structures to ACML and others not. But I think what I enjoy the most about the role that I have is the people. We're a people-based organization, provide a lot of services through the people that support the overall organization. And I really enjoy the people and the people that I work with on a day-to-day basis. If I didn't have that, it wouldn't be a role that I would be as excited about. I think as the company, it's really the collaborative nature, right? We all, in all of our roles and across our industry, there are complex challenges, right? And there's a variety of perspectives, whether it's the client perspective or the business line of business perspective. But the opportunity to collaborate and find solutions is a really interesting thing. And I haven't actually seen that in another business that I've worked for. That level of collaboration is huge, and it is the thing that I enjoy the most about the business.
IFMA's Toronto and South Central chapter is a professional development organisation belonging to the international facility management industry. It's one of the largest IFMA chapters in the world and is dedicated to elevating leaders in facilities management and related industries. They have been delivering internationally recognised programs, research and networking opportunities for more than 30 years. These opportunities expand and leverage the membership's collective knowledge and experiences. For more information, please visit ifma-toronto.org.
Geoff, let's steer our conversation now towards your passions and motivations, what drives you to perform. So what is it that puts that fire in your belly inside of your work?
Kind of alluded to it in the last bit of the conversation that we had. It's the people and the kind of the solution providing of complex challenges. And so when I get to work in the morning, I think it's, there's always something new to think about. There's always something new to kind of, I don't know if overcome is the right word, but to find a solution for it. And working with some of the best people in the industry really helps kind of build you up and move you forward. And so those are the kinds of things that really get me juiced up about what I'm doing in my day-to-day.
Now, I understand technology and automation are strong interests of yours. How have you witnessed the development of both in the FM space? And where do you see the future for technology and automation?
Yeah, that one's an interesting one. I've been, as you mentioned, I've been involved in IFMA for nearly 20 years, or a little over now, I guess. And my first role was the treasurer for the information technology community in 2002. And at that point, we were talking about technology that was bleeding edge, especially, when you're in 2002 world and tools. And we did that for a fairly long period of time. But when I was the chair of the community, we started to talk about casting out a strategic plan that would allow us to maybe talk about the bleeding edge, because there was the geek in a bunch of the group that wanted to talk about those things. But, how do we really support FMs in their day-to-day? And how does technology do that? And so we started to turn the kinds of conversations that we were having, especially at conferences, to something that was a little bit more accessible by the membership. And we did that for about 5 years, but there was still, up until about 2013, there was a fear factor around technology. There was, it was the thing that IT does. It was the thing that I don't want to break or touch. But in 2013, we started to see true interest. That was a very, very big turning point. We were in Los Angeles doing a facility fusion conference in the spring of 2013, and there was a switch that was flipped. It was incredible. So you went from having audiences that were really interested, but kind of a little bit smaller, to a packed room of people that had genuine interest. That persisted probably 3 to 5 years. We all have kind of a bit of a different perspective on when it really changed again, but it wasn't very long. In the grand scheme of things, I'm going to say somewhere around 2016, 2017, we started to have really participative conversations with the group. People had been been there in some cases and done that and had the t-shirt kind of thing. And so then we could actually start to say, okay, well, these are the things that we're talking about. Not only do we have case studies that we're presenting, but we're hearing from the audience and having that really two-directional conversation with the audience in presentations. And I think that kind of shows that technology has found a way into FM. And then you start to look at today with the kind of the term that's relatively new, prop tech. And there's all sorts of interest in prop tech now, and probably because the industry has been more or less starved of kind of high tech for a long period of time. And now we've got some things, going back to my earlier comment about data points and making decisions, and prop tech gives us that. I think there's still a piece of all of that we kind of have to be careful of, because there's so much technology coming at once. None of us want to be the group that adopts the Betamax of prop tech, whatever that might be. But it's really quite exciting.
What would you say are the steps that you have taken, Geoff, to both discover and also ignite your passion in FM?
It's interesting because I do think it goes back to my education, and some of the group might say, well, architecture school and facility management are not really the same thing. The building is the common point. We spent a lot of time in the design studio work coming up with complex design solutions. That really allows you to think about things from all angles, upside down and inside out, and come up with a solution to a complex problem. The answer typically became the building. I've been using those tools for a long time to develop technical solutions. And when I was in the consulting firm, that was one of the big things that we were trying to overcome. And we had actually developed a software to help us with that. And so learning things about technology and computers and things that was as much as I would like to be able to unlearn them now, because it's really not as much about what my career path is. They're with me and they help guide me every day. And then kind of beyond that, we get into the people solutions. And so there's the things that have ignited my passion, I think, go back to the beginning, which is solutions. And then how do you take all of the different things that add complexity to your life and find the right solution across that span?
I think it's a fair statement that you've made a lifelong commitment to education. So given that you value education for yourself, how do you see education in real estate for others?
There was this comment that one of my professors made in university, and I don't think about university until we have conversations like this, honestly, in most cases. But one of the things that he said was that architects peak when they're in their 50s. And really, it's because there is so much to learn. And real estate and FM are professions, and they take a long time and a lot of education to start to get to that point where you're peaking. And for that reason, I think that education is extremely important day in and day out. Often I recommend to people that they take a course that maybe steps them outside of what they do on a day-to-day basis a little bit, or takes them to a thing that they don't recognize in themselves yet and maybe they want to build on. I teach the facility management professional course for IFMA, and I've taught it to, I guess, a couple hundred people now. And I always start with the leadership and strategy piece of the course. Then we roll into finance and business. But what I find is the leadership and strategy portion is not something that people come to the table with in a lot of cases. They've learned little bits and pieces over the years, but often the strategic planning piece, you have to be kind of fairly high up in the organization to be able to do strategic planning. Kind of the entry-level FM or mid-career FM hasn't had that opportunity for a touch point. So getting into education would give you an opportunity to start to get a touch point from somebody that has been there a little bit and has an opportunity to describe that to you in a way that contextualizes it for your day-to-day.
Sharing ideas and knowledge is something that you certainly value. You've worn both hats as a mentor and a mentee. Why has it been so important for you to wear both hats during your career?
I said earlier that the career path for a lot of FMs is not, I want to be FM when I grow up. You kind of fall into the profession. There are opportunities to go to school for FM. There are not very many. There's 2 or 3 in Canada. And it's a relatively new profession, right? IFMA just celebrated its 40th anniversary, which gives you an idea of how young it is in relationship to other design professions at a minimum. And so I think we need to grow our replacements. And there really isn't a way to do that effectively without that mentor-mentee perspective. I've put a lot of time and energy into that. When I was on the global board of directors for IFMA, one of the things that I was doing was chairing the global young professional task force, is what we were calling it, and to try and find ways to develop toolkits and touch points to grow interest in the profession and then grow that young professional into a more seasoned professional. So we spent a lot of time on that, and I think that from a membership perspective, that is starting to show in the growth side of IFMA. For myself, on a kind of a personal level, that's one of the reasons why I teach so much. I teach at Ryerson, I teach at University of Toronto, I teach 2 different IFMA courses, both in Canada and the Middle East, and I find that there is so much value that comes out of it for, I hope for my students, but for me, in that that I know that there's an education that's getting out there, and there's that next generation coming up behind me. A little bit selfishly, as a person that's a leader in a business, I want to be able to find high quality people long term, but I also want to know that they're going to be out there for the entire industry. It's small, and what goes around comes around.
When your motivations are running low and the batteries need a recharge, what is it that you do to raise your game?
There's a couple different things that I do. One of the things that I find is if my batteries are running low, maybe because I haven't been focused at the macro level enough. So taking it from, maybe the day-to-day churn and going back to the high level and looking at it strategically and thinking about the big picture, that's one thing that really does helps refocus. The other thing that I do, and I mentioned a little bit earlier, is when I go to conferences, I'm not necessarily going to learn something specific. I'm going there to kind of allow my mind to open up. And if I'm sitting in a keynote presentation or maybe another presentation, or sort of having a conversation with a group of people, there are lateral connections that end up getting made as my mind has that opportunity to wander, that helps solve problems or create ideas I wouldn't have ever been able to do sitting in my chair in the office. And so I think that really helps me thinking about all of those things. It's even happened to me on vacation. I will never admit that to my wife, and you're not allowed to share this with her. But it has happened to me on vacation. There will be a time when I'm sitting on a beach chair, I'm sending a note to myself because I've allowed myself to think about something else. It could be watching even how the resort operates, and get some inspiration. Sometimes it's the things that are not to do. I've seen some terrible safety issues at resorts, but yeah, getting an opportunity to allow your mind to wander really helps.
I think that really feeds back into just having the passion and the motivation for what you do. And I think when you are so passionate about your trade and the industry as a whole, it is at times challenging to disconnect and switch off. And I've heard on numerous occasions from business leaders that they have been in other parts of the world, whether it was executives in real estate or operations or marketing, and they just see something that is going on inside of that building, and it's just another touch point to perhaps take something home and just to think about. And I think, again, that just really speaks to the passion that you have for what you do. Let's move now into learning a bit more about your career aspirations, and we're going to revisit the early years, your childhood. What was it that you wanted to be when you grew up?
I remember 6 years old having a conversation with my parents saying I wanted to be an architect. And I'm not even sure that I knew what an architect was at that point. One of the things that I think maybe got me closer to that term architect was the fascination with Lego and building things, and where other people might have been building, I'm not sure what, I was building buildings. And it got to a point where there was that awful sound of swishing Lego pieces that I'm sure make my parents cringe to this day, but that was likely the starting point or the kernel that got me to the point where I am now. And that carried, and there was a bit of a laser focus on that through my teens and, of course, through university. I wouldn't trade the education for anything. It was an incredible education. I've heard people describe it as a classic education. Waterloo has a balance between design, which is a huge focus, cultural history, technology, and the environment. And I think that when you look at those things and you can combine them in so many different ways, it created a broadness of career options that allowed me to get into a kind of a lateral industry that I really enjoy. What I'd really like to see in our industry is get to a point where guidance counselors in high schools have the tools that they would need to describe industries outside of the kind of the norms, right? You see a lot of people that it's just careers that are highly visible: police, fire, nurse, doctor, lawyer, things that are very, very visible. But the stuff that we do in real estate, facility management, for me, I don't think really become conversation pieces with guidance counselors. And I think there's a huge opportunity there. I couldn't tell you how exactly I got to architect, but I'm glad I did.
When you reach the sunset of your career and you're looking back over the journey through FM, what would you like your legacy to be, Geoff?
I actually had a bit of an opportunity to start thinking about that last year because there was a question that was similar on the IFMA fellowship application form. Really what I want to look back on my career on is say that I advanced the profession. You know, I mentioned that IFMA is 40 years old, which means the profession is a little bit older than that, but I really want to be able to look back and say I made a difference and made this profession something that's much different than it was when I started in it, and that's really what I'd like my legacy to be. And I think I've made moves in that direction, but hoping that I've got a fairly long career left.
Geoff, thanks for joining us on the People Who Perform podcast today. It's been great. It's been a pleasure listening to your career journey through the FM industry, the impact that you've had on IFMA, the importance of education inside of your career and your growth, and how you've given back in many forms. I really appreciate your thoughts and sharing in this conversation. And that brings me now into the final question, which is a give back to our audience. If you were to handpick 3 lessons to share with the next generation of real estate leaders, what would they be?
I think the first piece that I would say is build a network of peers and listen. What I mean by that is, we talked a lot about IFMA and networking and that kind of thing, but there's an opportunity, especially for the next generation, just to really insert yourselves into these conversations inside the network and listen to what other people are saying. Think about what they're saying and try and imagine what that looks like for your role or for your interests, and start to build from there. I find the moments. I find the moments to have those conversations because I find them rewarding. I've got a colleague in Phoenix that I speak to probably 2 or 3 times a week, and it's usually in my drive home. But I've got a colleague in Australia that I talk to often in my drive to work because it's his evening. And so we have those conversations, and that's part of the network that I've built up over time. Really closely aligned in our thoughts, but an opportunity to have really interesting conversations that wouldn't happen if I hadn't gone and started to build that network. The second thing I'd say is to find your niche. It's a huge industry. There's wildly varied roles and responsibilities in what we do. And start to think about, as I said earlier, the things that you really, really enjoy and build upon them. There's an opportunity to grow doing the things that you enjoy at work every day inside FM. You don't have to lock in on something that you don't enjoy because that's the next step in the career. Find the things that you enjoy, stay attached to them, and find the next opportunity that allows you to leverage the thing that you enjoy and growth at the same time. And then the last element is around volunteering. For me, it was hugely important. I would say that if I hadn't volunteered, I probably wouldn't be at the point in my career where I am today. And that's because I was able to participate in something that was beyond my current role. I talked a little bit earlier about the fact that strategic planning isn't often in a role that's in a kind of an entry-level to mid-level role in an organization. I had the opportunity through IFMA to get into some really interesting strategic planning elements as early as 2004. So I started to build that competency only a few years into my career that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do until maybe another 10 years later if I hadn't built on it. But I'm not even sure that I would have gotten my second role in the industry had I not had strategic planning experience and knowledge and being able to think at the macro level. So there are things that are inside volunteership that are intangible, and there are things that are very much tangible, and this would be one of them. Get involved in something that you have an opportunity to learn things that you wouldn't have learned before. So in summary, I think that there's the thread together, right? Build your network, listen, learn what people are doing so that you can find your niche. Find the opportunity that suits you the best and set your sights. And one of the ways to help you kind of overcome maybe things that are holding you back is to volunteer. Build a tool set for yourself that matches what your next step in your career is, and volunteering helps you do that.
Thank you for listening to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers podcast brought to you by Highview Partners, a talent search and recruitment firm focused exclusively on Canadian real estate. If your real estate team is looking to find the best next hire, or if you're ready to make the best next move in your career, then reach out to Highview Partners today. Follow us on LinkedIn and visit us at highviewpartners.ca.